Hi, today we'll be talking to a friend of mine and Sydney-based artist Huseyin Sami, whose show Matter and Colour just opened up at Taubert Contemporary in Berlin. So where's Huseyin? Hi. Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Hey, welcome.
Good.
You're in your studio, right? This is
Yeah. In the machine.
where it all happens, and behind you
Yeah.
is one of the most recent works from the show upstairs, or
Well, this is a new series that I'm working on at the moment. So it's just some silver monochromes I'm making currently, probably for something there next year. But it's just it's a particular material. It's a little bit different to what I usually use in my paintings. It's something I've been working on for the past few months, just getting familiar with the material.
And the material you're
It was
speaking
just
about is exclusively acrylic house paint.
That's right, yeah. So sort of industrial made and essentially a ready-made material that you pick up at the general hardware store. But yeah, I mean, in essence, it's sort of formulated to be almost on par with like a plastic.
Do you think that this choice to work exclusively with this medium, does that limit your choice of colors? Or because I've noticed that, yeah, the metallic is kind of a deviation on like your pastel lighter hues that you choose to work with. Can you speak maybe a bit about why this limiting of color?
Well, early on, I just used to use, so going back to art school, really just sourcing paint from the hardware store for mist tints. So wasn't necessarily looking for colors per se. I was more interested in the material because I was sort of working in a particular way where I was just pouring a lot of this medium onto different surfaces and working in different ways and just experimenting completely. Probably the last 10 years that sort of became a little bit more of a consideration. And so I decided that, I would use that palette, that ready-made palette that they provide you at the hardware store. And, sort of all, I suppose the majority of it is a kind of really pastel, palette, a lot of white-based tints. I mean, there's quite a few variations now, but I decided, consciously to kind of limit myself to white-based colours, and that was primarily more of as a function of pouring the paint. It was a lot thicker. I understood how it sort of worked a lot better. With the darker colours, it required more tint. And it made it a little bit more fluid and more watery, so that it ran really quickly when I was pouring paint, and it didn't sort of dry in the same kind of way. So it was all this sort of learning of the material and different colors and what it is actually made up of. And I decided that the white base was, for me, it worked a lot better. It's nice to sort of introduce new colors. It's a bit more interesting when I can sort of juxtapose a lot of these colors against each other and have that to play with. It's just what sort of becomes a little bit more interesting for me anyway.
And in terms of like the actions that it requires to create the skins in particular, you talk about pouring and I don't know, when I was writing the piece, I was kind of making links to Fontana in terms of the cuts that you make, or the cuts that you inevitably have to make on the skins, and also Perino with these like kind of restretched canvases, like these actions. Why do you think that? We'll maybe speak a bit about the actions that are required with the skins, as well as like why do you think that these interventions are really relevant, and the surface of the canvas is so relevant in the 21st century, like in our world.
Well, a lot of the works, the early works were just sort of made with that action of pouring. So sort of just pouring the medium out of the can, just really minimal function. I just sort of wanted to engage in that process as more of a mediator rather than something that, I was sort of more consciously making gestures or representation of. It was just more, became this tool in this process. So, but I really enjoy, revealing some of that interaction. A lot of the studio processes is, they're quite private, and I think a lot of, and some of these activities that I want to display publicly, they're more of these, absurd actions, really, sort of that really tests the boundaries of, endurance, as well as, engaging the idea of painting as well. So, sort of painting with these brushes that I make that are, the length of a room, and trying to actually create something
about that. And talking about kind of influences or context, like everybody's work has both a local and an international context. And how is Sydney an interesting city for you to work in, and why is this, and how does your work function or operate in Sydney per se? Like, and obviously you have a gallery in Berlin as well, and how does that transplant? How do you feel that is and also in the show, in art fairs like Dallas?
Look, it's an interesting question, because it's definitely you feel a distance, I think, from a lot of the major art hubs around the world. I mean, we're not too far from Asia, which is one of the biggest as well, but a lot of great artists that always producing work. And I think the time will come when Australia will probably, and the artists that work here will get a little bit more recognition and exposure, and we won't have to necessarily go hunting overseas for galleries. But I mean, at this stage, I think that's still a necessity to broaden your audience and create some broader context for your work, because that's, I think, we all go to art school, we all learn the same history, and we're all talking the same language in a sense, and we're all talking to a particular practice. And with painting, I think there's a obviously a broader and longer history in Europe and in the States. So there's always going to be a longing to kind of somehow engage with that, for sure.
Yeah, I can, because of knowing you and knowing the group that we're in, and with the gallery at Sarah Cottier, and I can place you between colorists of late John Nixon and Haney, Armanius, and Michaela Dwyer and Andrew Donaldson. But how has it been working alongside and with these artists?
Oh, I mean, pretty incredible. I think I was lucky enough to have a lot of those artists that you mentioned as mentors at art school, and after leaving there, still having those relationships, especially with John. It was an incredible influence, and it was so sad that he's sort of gone, but he's left such a strong legacy with a lot of artists, and
also a connection to Europe, a really strong connection to Europe.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Like he was one of those guys who paved that way into Europe, and I think there's a definite there's a more of a stronger understanding of abstraction in Europe, and I think that's a little lacking here. So I think that's another reason why I think a lot of the good artists do find their way to Europe or where there is a deeper understanding in the type of work that they make. But Michaela and Haney is sort of really amazing thinkers, with material. I think that sort of that engagement with material has always sort of been, for me, it's a deep interest, of how to sort of not think about painting in a painter's way, but think about painting in a sculptor or a spatial way as well. So it's sort of definitely had an influence in the way I thought about how to go about making work, and not necessarily being restricted in the way I did approach it. So I kind of like to, completely turn things on their head, and work with tables and furniture and mirrors, and it was pure experimentation at art school. I think that that's the way it should be. I don't think you should necessarily formulate a way of working that you're going to be working for forever.
Your studio's at home, so you can, like, how often are you in the studio? And
every day, doing something every day, which is habitual. It's sort of something I've kind of not been you kind of can't relinquish that. Sort of you kind of learn to do it early on, and it becomes part of your life. And I think it's important. As an artist, you're always kind of working in a way. You're either working physically or you're thinking about something.
I want to talk about, in terms of color, and the color that you've chosen in matter and color to paint the walls. I know that this is a new venture for you. I did make this link in my text about how they reminded me of quite clinical colors, of almost like something out of a hospital, which then brought me to this idea of the skin graft. And kind of this abjectness that we feel, or this distance, especially in matter and color, with the pieces being so big, which is a new thing of yours. The scale of the artworks, they create this distance that we must navigate. And I also talked about the skin of the milk. I don't know if anyone could see this, but I really feel like there's this uneasiness about these beautiful kind of enticing colors, but you're pushed away, you're repelled about how it's not quite as it is. It's not, the materiality isn't how it should be, in a way. And that's the intervention, I guess.
Well, I think, I mean, look, it's always a question I get, when people look at the works. It's sort of like, and I like that they have to conceptually engage with the works in terms of thinking about how they're made. I think there's always that nice moment when people look at paintings and they have to think about it a little bit harder. I think they have that playful time with it as well, especially with my work, and because of this sort of undulating surface, and there's sort of these ripples and these folds in the material. I mean, they're quite seductive. It's really, it is a seductive surface. I mean, you can't sort of deny that. And I think that is in part because of the material itself, and the way I kind of produce these skins as well. There's I've put myself in some ridiculous situations with these works. It's just kind of
becoming the skin.
But I think it's that idea about working, and that challenge, that physicality as well, which has really influenced a lot of that performance-based works as well. So there's sort of this continuity of this idea about how I work in the space and how I engage with the material and how that sort of relates to painting.
And how then the actions then become the very private actions that happen within the studio that then are shared.
Yeah, exactly.
And become new works.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's about all we have time for.
Cool. All right, nice.
All right, thank you.
See you later. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Huseyin, for answering my questions. And just a small note that Huseyin's exhibition, Matter and Colour, is open in Berlin at Taubert Contemporary till the 30th of January.